Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reacts where today we have ourselves 3 tracks from an act named Color the Void, the first of these titled Burned Bridges. And if we switch over to here, we have ourselves a track on the screen on YouTube, the music video. We're going to listen through each of these 3 tracks today from start till finish and we're going to hear what we think. Starting with Burned Bridges, let's go. Really pretty. Crazy echo here on the vocals. Interesting kind of dusty tones to the guitar. Slick little drum roll there. Sound design are really pretty with how things are placed around the stereo field. They move around. Okay, so I really enjoyed that music video. I mean, I know it's such a kind of basic thing to say, but watching musicians actually play their instruments is quite nice. But to talk about this first track, Burned Bridges, what do we think this track is about? I think this song is about someone not only going over the fact that in their life they've made these mistakes, that they're made, but they're also showing that they understand, why they made them, how they got to that point. And they're also discussing with the people that have their knives in to not twist them. Like it's not just also that they're burnt bridges, but they've also made those bridges to burn in the first place. It's just kind of metering and sort of like balancing, finding equilibrium with our life journey, how, we make mistakes and how we learn from them. So I think that's what this track is about, at least on a first impression perspective. I think the vocals tell the story really neatly. We've got a vocalist who's very earnest in their approach. We know how to create those really sort of compelling, catchy vocal melodies in the hook sections, which are more intense sonically, but we are also a little more subtly vulnerable and gentle in other parts. We have range of expression, we hit the notes cleanly, are very comfortable in our head and chest voice. And ultimately, it's a song where you hear it and you think, okay, how could we improve upon this? From that perspective of storytelling. And I think you need range. You also need an understanding of how to balance yourself and what you're doing with the rest of the instruments and the arrangement, because there's a lot going on with the various guitar parts. Even the bass explores a bit, goes beyond the root notes. And so, I mean, there's like tippy-tappy parts, I think, as well on certain instruments there, where we're really articulate and considered with our note choices. So when you're a singer, you need to be kind of actively monitoring. So when you're a singer, you need to be actively monitoring your position within that arrangement, that harmony, and I feel like we did that very well here. It kind of reminds me of a lot of the kind of pop punk in the mid-2000s in a way that I mean that favorably. I did like a lot of that music, and I think that the tone and approach to it makes a lot of sense, especially when considering the subject matter. I think it's like angsty without being too angsty, and I feel like it matches the grittiness of some of those kind of dusty rhythm guitar tones and arpeggios there. Because like structurally at 4 minutes 07, there's so much to appreciate within this piece. It's not just verse, chorus, and like repeated. You have these wonderful sort of like jazzy bar chords at the start, again with that kind of that sort of like crispy overdrive. And then you have the vocals with kind of like a radio filter there, getting rid of a lot of the lower frequencies to kind of make it seem like it's a phone call. And then that adds a lot of power when you have the drums and other elements come in. Even if you have the tippy taps up in the upper register of the lead guitar there, they notch within the frequency spectrum really neatly with what's going on otherwise. Things don't compete. That's as much of a songwriting, instrumental layering thing as a post-production thing. And there's like variation to the different guitar riffs and different parts and the drums. There's a lot of cool different drum beats, which we'll get into in a moment, that make each part or segment distinct. Like there's like a normal time feel to it as opposed to double the half time. And then when you get into that second verse, there's like a halftime feel to it where you don't have the snares on the 2 and 4, you have it only on the 3 there. It's a deliberate way to slow down the piece without kind of like making it too blunt. Like there's a cohesive, sensible chord progression there with major and minor triads that you can follow along to. But there's so much decoration and air candy in there in addition to that really sort of like spoils the listener to an extent. I mean, like it's still distinct. With how driving the chorus is, again, with the deliberate vote. It's almost like the chorus is the most important part. You get a lot of variation with everything else, which is exactly how it's supposed to behave. You're supposed to get that nuance outside of that hook a lot of the time. And I like the fact that we don't have the vocals all the time, that we allow the instruments to be by themselves a little bit, whether they are arpeggios or sort of jangly kind of lead melodies, or the bass kind of sliding about, or like rolling between the triads. You have great use of harmonics in certain sections there with the effects chains on them, just sound really kind of glowy and ethereal. And for the kind of end of the song to kind of fade out with the tail of the overdriven or distorted guitars with the kind of like the reverb or sort of chorusy tails of the cleaner elements there, is just really it's a very gentle way of finishing things. It's almost a bittersweet experience listening to this track, not just through what's discussed within the subject matter of the lyrics, but also with the instrumental performance itself. With its chord choices, it tries to communicate the complexity of the situation without being too on the nose. Without going on one direction or the other, you're not sure how it'll turn, but you enjoy the line, right? Should I say regardless? And then that kind of like little lead section around the 2-minute 40 mark there where the guitar with like the single coils kind of like rotates around the 12th, 15th frets. It's really kind of gorgeous. It's not an overcomplicated shreddy solo because I don't think it would have suited the style of music or the kind of what it previously described. It's trying to find a way to match the technical complexity of everything before it in a way that kind of fits the ether of it, but decorates it with further sort of like enrichment of those sixths or sevenths or ninths or something like that to kind of make it really kind of gorgeous sounding. And we have those vocal harmonies as well in certain elements just to kind of like expand upon it. So it's the structure of this track's kind of tricky to nail down aside from the generic. There are verses and choruses, instrumental sections, and then intro and an outro there. But nonetheless, the transfers between parts are seamless and it's very smooth listening. If I was to sort of talk about individual instruments, I think the guitar playing with the various arpeggios, again, highlighting those major or minors or extendeds are just fantastic there. The more sort of like chordal kind of strummed elements in later parts like the hook and stuff like that are driving and work well rhythmically alongside what's going on with the drum parts. And I think ultimately we just explore the instrument well enough, especially with, again, those upper tippy tap parts there with the lead solo. And there's just a lot of different techniques explored that really don't take the listener's attention for granted. The bassist typically working with the roots or going between the triads or maybe exploring beyond that certain parts is great. In fact, I think I've just also found the tapping part on the bass, if I'm not mistaken. I could have had that mistaken. No, both the guitar and the bassist are tippy tapping around the 30-second mark. So everyone's doing tippy taps. So I like that we're not just relying on the low end there. And when you take away the low end from the bass guitar and put it into mids and highs, things feel like they're floating, which is really cool. The drummer, with solid proficiency across the main four rhythms, quarters, eighths, triplets, and sixteenths, just does a fantastic job of exploring the kit there, working across the cymbal and ride or crash patterns there, going between normal and double time there, or half time, should I say. Working the 30 seconds into different drum fills and using great use of space with the toms as well for articulation and emphasis. And just ultimately just a really well-balanced measured performance with a metronome-like quality to it. No complaints at all about it. This is a really tight band performatively. I think that thematically, again, the extensions to those chords, coupled with the catchy, accessible phrasing of the main melodies in the hook section, cover both bases of what I think we wanted to accomplish within us, whilst being stylistically appropriate. And I think in terms of the studio production, just as a preface, a lot of these are comments I'm probably going to have for these other two tracks as well, if this is the kind of level that we're on. So I'll try not to repeat myself whilst also paying homage to it or referring to similar comments across, but it's just very, very, very good. The vocals are nice and clear in the mix, whether they are filtered or not, with a bit of compression, a little bit of reverb on them. Occasional echoes as well to make use of space. The guitar, bass, drums are well leveled within the frequency spectrum, highs, mids, and lows in the stereo field with things not competing for attention. There's a symmetry with the different ways that guitar layers are done there to kind of make it a bit more sort of intriguing and kind of wistful. And it's nice low without pumping. So the bus compression limiting is handled in addition to the dynamic range being there between quiets and louds and not being too overdone. So ultimately a great start to proceedings. I feel really, really positive after listening through this. I think that clearly this is just a really excellent first impression. They know what they're doing. But then we have track number 2 for today on Spotify. So they're on YouTube and Spotify. We've got Settling Our Distances. Similar guitar tone to the previous track. We'll get the art up on the screen there so you can see it nice and big. Interesting offbeat there. Phenomenal drum fill. Great use of space. I just want to pause for a second, just quickly talk about the backing vocals, like the kind of crowd chant kind of part going into the mains. It's just such an easy way to go backwards and forwards. Such an easy sort of attention device there. But it's also a change in texture and tone there. When it's more kind of spoken or shouted there, you're not going for like a note choice necessarily. You don't want to deliberately go for the flat second, if you know what I mean. But you know, you're not trying to be melodic about it. So that kind of like the size of it as well, contrasting with the main vocalist in the center, it's just really sensible. Just again, it's really good.
Just a 19, so crazy to me. We're 2 states away, 625 miles between you and me.
It's interesting that it's only on the left side.
Even alone, I wouldn't stay. I've been gone yesterday. You raised me up just to cut me down.
Great fuzzy tone to the bass as well there for a bit of sizzle.
This shit, it gets me heated. I guess it's locking season. It's something I was needed for everything. It's something I was needed. It's something I was needed. It's something I was needed. It's something I was needed.
Track number 2. So settling our distances, I think it's play on word of settling our differences. But they're talking about being so far away from each other in North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken there. There are things in here which make me think that they didn't have a necessarily totally functional relationship. They just want to fight about everything. And maybe it was an issue with like a long-term relationship or something like that. I'm not sure. But I'm sorry that they had to go through that. Sounds rough. I actually realize now vocally, because I think that's what the track's about, what I said before, that the kind of the chants or the kind of screams or the yelling, that's kind of inferring the frustration that they have there. And I think that's really effective. It's something you get a lot in harder genres, like, you know, metal and like other parts where they have vocal fry or anything like that. And it works really well just as kind of like a blunt weapon here. But there's this kind of sophistication and nuance to it here that's kind of coupled by the extension and harmonies. I'm not trying to say that metal's unsophisticated. It's just more here that the complications with the harmonies, etc. It provides a sort of environment where effectively you kind of need just a moment to kind of really understand the reason for that fury or that frustration. So I think that the kind of the shouting, then going into the clean vocals and the chorus parts, because a lot of what we had on the mic was very similar in terms of like the affectation to the previous song. And I think we did some sort of like vocal fry, kind of rougher vocals in that last part song as well. It's just here it's more pronounced in the hooks. It's like a to and fro, a call and response. It's really effective because it's very satisfying going up, back, forwards, you know, like I don't think you could have I think it would have been less interesting if you had that been done the same sort of like way of recording all those lines. You could have gotten away with it. I've heard bands have done similar approaches, but it's just attention to detail here on behalf of Color the Void. So yeah, ultimately, sensible decisions made on the mic as well. There, we're expressing ourselves, the raw kind of feelings behind it, and it, you can follow along with it. I think there was some really like structurally, there were more verses and choruses within this one, smooth transfers. There were some really interesting drum sort of fill transfers here with some really elegant, quick playing there. Like they're not easy fills to play, and I could hear that we're playing as a band within the room. And it's a very sort of organic performance as well. And the fact that we're able to sort of like nail those fills is testament to their proficiency on the kit. But they also know when to sort of like simplify their drum beats to kind of make it a bit more sort of accessible to people wanting to sort of like nod their heads to something. It's like a knowing when it's enough and knowing when it's too much kind of thing. And we handle that. We balance that tightrope. It's really cool, sort of again structurally, to have that bass riff play that sort of like little motif around the 3-minute mark, if I'm not mistaken. There, playing its own sort of like main melody. I like that it has its own little bit of its own little solo section there, because you can hear in a lot of parts of this track that the bass they want to explore. They want to not just rely on the roots of the octaves or the fifths there. They're very comfortable being like an alternate for even the rhythm devices there, working alongside the drums in proportion to that. It's great that we know how to be both rhythmic and melodic on the low end. I think the asymmetry as well with the guitar take in certain elements such as the front and also in other parts there does, as a listener, make you question what's going on. So we kind of have this at the very beginning of the piece for the instrumental intro. You just don't know why it's only on that side. It fills out eventually and you get that satisfaction of having your kind of bases covered, but it piques curiosity. And it just helps as well that the actual ideas that have been played on the guitar are, as I've said, they're beautiful. That these chord types, these note choices, there's very few deliberately clashy elements. I suppose part of that is down to the kind of rustic nature of the guitar, like the guitar amp, the sound coming from the guitars in the mix, the way they sound. It contrasts and it glows alongside those note choices. And we have some distortion later on that mixes with the overdrive and just has this nice sort of warm, kind of like cozy blanket-esque kind of feeling to it. And like you have these kind of like unison chords that kind of flutter in the arrangement later on when there is space outside of the story parts. And you wonder why it's there. You have more of the symmetry from the previous track. It's pronounced here in a way that isn't distracting. It still kind of feels like everything's coordinated because there are parts where things are together, again, such as in the hook, but they know to differentiate occasionally. But we don't sleep on the drums. Like even in those simpler parts, we're comfortable with our 16th kicks there, and we're kind of hinting that there could be more to come. But because of the variety of different drum fills, as well as the different ideas with the guitar bass, whilst there are distinct functions and parts you can cling on to an anchor, just the coupling of the bass being more active in those kind of crowd chanty parts as well is kind of neat, because it's like the band knows that there's less melody in those crowd chanty parts, so the bass has more time to move, and even if the vocals are on a lower end, it's not going to compete with the note choices there sonically. But just for us to kind of fade out with the guitars again with the hammer-on pulley-offy parts there is neat. And to have that kind of like tom kind of drummy fill thing with the bass riff as well, knowing to kind of have the toms as a lower element kind of thing, removes the high end that we might have had on the other parts of the piece and creates sort of like contrast there too. I feel like anything more that I say here will be very similar to what I've said for the previous track, because I can hear how these two songs that I've heard today, Burn Bridges and Settling Our Distances, are related. They sound like they were made by the same musicians with similar instruments, and I like that. I like that there's consistency there. The risk you can have when you're too explorative with styles and genres and stuff like that is that people don't associate a connection. Thematically, I think the occasional harshnesses of the vocal styles there that you have, alongside the occasional kind of glitchy textures, some of the distorted guitar elements, are occasional sort of like there are shows of frustration and maybe resentment. But I think there's more to this track because of the key signature, the sort of main chord choices, the extensions there. We're not trying to be too generic. Like the ninths are just so wonderful there. It hints at there being a brighter kind of sunrise beyond the kind of dusk that we're in. And it's nice to not feel that resolution when I'm still not sure entirely what the track is about. But ultimately, really well written piece, really tight performance in terms of the chemistry of the composition and way things are done. And I think it's just a solid recording itself. Things were handled well. Again, you can kind of tell with the way that things were played that they were playing together, kind of recording their instruments. It's like a very organic performance there. It's very clean in terms of the mixing, like the bass, guitars, drums are, you can hear them easily. Like this sounds commercial grade. It's nice and loud without pumping. Same comments as the previous one, I think, but continued quality in terms of post. So well done. And then finally, we have Mars as a Bowling Ball, track number 3. Got lyrics for this one. Interesting chord choice there. Interesting.
It's not where you're at, it's where you've been. All I know is I know nothing. Couldn't fill you up with what you need. I could never tell you weren't consistent.
It's a tighter mix.
Yes, never know. Run it back and do it different. The shit you said would be ignored. Take me back to that. I don't give a damn. Was there something I was missing? Or was I just chasing a dead-end dream? There was progress and intermission. I didn't want to cave in, or was it gonna cave? Yeah, you're everything. You were everything. You meant everything. You were everything.
Oh. Laser sounds.
Was there something I was missing? Or was I just chasing a dead-end dream? There was progress and intermission. I didn't want to cave in. I finally fucking gave in to everything. You were everything. You meant everything. You tear me down just to build me up. I tried so hard to fix this, but we could never coexist. The only thing that I was missing. And just like heroin, your glasses on the pavement and pulled me in. Till I called it quits.
So that was Mars as a Bowling Ball, track number 3. I'll be honest from the outset, after reading through these lyrics, I'm not sure what Mars as a Bowling Ball, the name, has explicitly to this at this point. I'll think on it, and if I do, I'm being genuine here. I'm not being facetious. So if I figure it out, I'll let you know. But my take on this is that it's about someone who is looking at another who they had something special with, and it was warm while it lasted, and it became cold. And the general sort of impression or understanding is that they have brought this person up to tear them down. And I think there's going to be an audience, and this is something I usually talk about at the end, but there's going to be an audience that will be able to relate to all the stuff that they've discussed in each of these 3 tracks, like fervently. These are relatable things, and I think that's important, because if it's too opaque, people will not understand it or get it, or even worse, they'll feel like they're not allowed to, which can be frustrating for people. Unless they give you the grace of not feeling the need to understand it. I think ultimately this story, I'm really sad to hear that they went through it. There was genuine pain that I could hear in their voice. The general feel of this song was minor oriented, which kind of hinted at that. And while we had a similar approach in terms of the instrumental choices and layers, the previous track, although I feel like that crescendo kind of laser, squiggly kind of vibrato sound that last pull was really neat. We've had that big crescendo in each of these 3 tracks, haven't we, from a structural perspective? I think that if I focus on the vocals first, I try and go things in order. The part where we were just kind of crying out, we were screaming out, was just so visceral, and it was just so effective. It mirrors and confronts the situation we're in. It does not try to sugarcoat or sweeten it. It's very kind of like blunt. And I think that is a contrast to what we were doing sort of like with the more cleaner vocals in the previous part of the start. It's just very good. And the kind of distortion or the kind of like really kind of haggard, nasty kind of grittiness that we had to that was just, it expressed their fury so well. So it was powerful. It wasn't too overwhelming in the mix. When I said it was a tighter mix, it's just that I feel like things were just a little bit more constricted in this one than in previous parts. Not in a bad way, though. It just feels like things are a bit closer. I don't know how to quite explain it. I think it could be a compression thing, but ultimately, similar quality of vocal performance, again, comfortable with just voice. Great sort of note choices. Very comfortable with harmonizing when we needed to, navigated the arrangement well into different patterns, and segmented effectively. I like that we explored the triads with those vocal harmonies as well to kind of really make it shine. And we were a little bit quieter in some of the ways that we sung some of the verses and stuff like that, which I think is really cool. It just really seems like we're having more of a communication rather than talking at someone. So that was cool. To start with a drum fill at the beginning, dun-dun-dun-dun, was just a really neat idea. It changes up immediately when you get into that first guitar riff, and you're kind of left wondering what's going to happen next. If things sound good and flow neatly, that's just a really effective way of keeping listeners' attention, is to have that change. And we have like range within the open chords and arpeggios that we have there with little leady bits in addition to that. And we explore the stereo field again with the different sort of palm muted guitar plucked parts on the sides there. The vocals have plenty of room in the center because we're not being too sort of like open with our chord choices or strumming at that point. You kind of need to separate stuff in the mix, so or like from a songwriting perspective, so that the vocals have enough room, especially if you're in a similar range to some of those note choices. The difficult thing with having lots of pretty high notes is that if the vocalist is in a similar range, they will sound a little bit kind of less clear and a little bit less kind of chimey. We also have some interesting kind of like rotary, kind of like reverbish kind of stuff, or like processing going on with the lead guitar tone around like the minute mark. And I just think it kind of reminds me of very sort of like grungy affectation, and it because of the way it kind of simmers in the mix, it explores some interesting note choices there. I don't think we're entirely doing diatonics the entire time. I think it's just a new kind of sound that we haven't had previously, and it's great that we're approaching lead parts differently. Like, we've still got the kind of strummed or kind of coilish kind of like guitar parts and the kind of catchier hook elements, which are easy to follow along to, you know. They're solid. And again, I like the crescendo that we had going into the last part, we call it quotes, and we had the kind of screamy kind of like vocal part as well, which is a different change sort of structurally. But we also follow a lot of the functions that we have with previous tracks there. We're not doing a completely different thing per song, that we're trying to establish, I think, an expectation for the listener, and we do that well here. There's consistency, and there's kind of like chimey guitar parts later on that kind of they kind of float through the mix, and we kind of break up the last kind of chorus or hook section, which kind of plays twice, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but we add little bits to it to kind of add extra flavor to not overdo it. Or at least if we don't do it twice, it just feels like there's enough. Like it's a similar-ish. How do I say this? I think it's just a very similar chord progression, if I'm not mistaken, so they feel similar. The vocals change, but it's just a kind of like it glows, and there's a consistency in the quote-unquote feel of it, so like it seems kind of constant. The lone guitar part at the end there in the center of the stereo field almost seems like it's signing out the vocalist there after their learning curve that they had. And you don't get a positive, happy ending to this one. It's with this band, it seems to be either kind of bittersweet or sad. Though, you know, there are some major elements, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's depressing. It's just an interesting kind of voice in there, and considering the subject matter, it makes sense. So I like that we explore more interesting sort of like triad-based or scale-oriented parts and lead elements there. I think a lot of the rhythm guitar strummed or kind of arpeggiated elements are similar across the board. We have some interesting sort of like little kind of ridey parts there, like kind of like tippy taps and breaks there, and transitions there from the fills, which are cool. We know to be loud when the drums with like the crashes and stuff, and we push the limiter a little bit in post in a way that doesn't overwhelm it, and allowing the kind of the wiggly woggly of the laser sound in that crescendo part without having a drum fill going into it allows things to float for a minute before you kind of slam back down into the hook. But I feel like we were more restrained with the drums in this one. We were trying to play and maybe pocketing for the most part, I suppose. I think that's a clever idea as well at times, to allow other parts to be busier. Thematically, mostly minor oriented. We had different chord progressions, don't get me wrong. We had even some parallel majors or some sort of modal ideas there, but it went and resolved back to the minor there, almost like we had some hope and then it was dashed. Just again, not having the entire same song be the whole minor key the entire time, I think was a smart move, because it would have just maybe been a little bit too kind of dark potentially compared to their other works if they'd done that. You kind of need a bit of quirkiness in there. So I think ultimately the chord choices, the triad choices there structurally make sense with the vocals. Things are well connected. Studio production, I think in general, again, the vocals, guitar, bass, drums, etc., everything, including the crescendo and the little laser sound, they're all leveled within the mix. Again, things are well sort of like decorated within the stereo field. Things were a bit tighter, I think, with the gluing of this one, so there was less dynamic range, I think, overall in post. But it wasn't to a point where it was distracting. I still feel it was mixed really well, nice enough without pumping, similar comments to the rest. And we're going to talk about each of these 3 tracks more in the conclusion. Because welcome to my conclusion of my review of these 3 tracks from an act named Color the Void, titled Burn to Bridges, Settling Our Distances, Mars is a Bowling Ball. So just before we get into it, I've given like reasonably thorough sort of analysis on each of these 3 songs individually. These are my overall thoughts on these 3 tracks. Typically, I sort of mention a few things I liked about them in general, though I will be specific about those as well as any applicable critique. And then finally, how I felt after listening through these 3 as just a general listener. If I was to discuss some highlights for me personally, it would be the vocal performance in general. I think that there were some smart decisions made, simply being able to sort of use a head and chest voice while respecting the range that we're in, allowing the instruments within the arrangement to not interfere through use of the panning and post or the chord choices or the bass being dominant in certain parts, or simply having the vocals not be there when we wanted to have other lead elements. So even in that bass sort of solo section there we had in some parts, we had really well thought out guitar harmonies and melodies and arpeggios and lead sections and tippy tappy parts. On the guitar and bass we explored those instruments well, so if we did not know what we were doing on the microphone, it might have been difficult to be as effective as we were otherwise. But I feel here we clearly understand our function as a storyteller, how to express ourselves, how to use different tones of voice. Like there were some parts where it was like kind of shrieking or frying or kind of like yelling there. We had kind of like effects on our voice that sounded kind of like really crispy. Other parts, when we had the cleaner vocals, we simply had ourselves our full tone there. Other parts we had like the kind of radio filter where it sounded like a phone call that we're having with someone. We had vocal harmonies as well. We had call and response between those kind of shouted vocals and the mains. We had a lot of range there. And I think typically the note choices we used, the melodies and sequences were really effective. They both communicated and expressed the tone of what we were talking about in a way which made sense. And we also sounded like we were going through the stuff that we were talking about. So ultimately a completely effective performance on the microphone without any complaints on my behalf across the board. I think in addition to that, another thing that was done really well were the actual instrumental performances throughout these 3 tracks in general. I think that with the guitar, bass, and drum parts we have here, these are just really really proficient musicians. We had a wide variety of different ideas on the guitars, typically sort of like picked notes or kind of arpeggiated chords, or strummed parts in the heavier kind of choruses. There we used a wide range of different sort of like clean, overdriven to distorted tones. There was some rotary on certain parts, reverbs and delays. We explored our textures and sounds in a way where it also supported a lot of what we were trying to do with the vocals. I think it's not just that we played these ideas certain ways, though. It's also the chord choices, and we used a lot of majors and minors and occasional sort of like chromatics or like flats, but only with unison chords. But we also had pentatonics and some parallel majors or sort of modal parts there with some really kind of quirky feelings and some of those kind of like occasional kind of parallels. And it's just, but we also knew either to keep it bittersweet or to rely on the minor in a way which is appropriate for the subject matter. When we did have our lead parts, there were lots of interesting ideas, like again, like the tappy elements there. We had slides and hammer-ons and pull-ons and low bendy parts there. Things were typically asymmetrical within the stereo field. There were different guitars doing different parts. One song, I think, particular Setting Line Distances, had just a guitar on one side, which is maybe the person on that side talking, and then maybe it comes together on both sides at the end. I'm not sure. It's just wonderful because it's interesting. If everything is the same, it becomes predictable. And so you can't even take the listener's attention for granted with a 3-minute piece these days, let alone anything longer than this. Structurally, these tracks were within the 2 to 4 minute sweet spot, or just outside of it, but they flew by because of the attention to detail with things like the guitar alone. But it's also the bass parts, where the bass guitarist just had a really good understanding of their sort of function, supporting both the drum kit in terms of the rhythm elements, but also the root notes of the chord progressions and the guitar parts. But they also had their own time to shine with like a little bass solo part stuff in the second track, and they also explored and burned bridges and Mars and the bowling ball. They were happy to kind of do it to their own sort of like pedal notes or arpeggios or go between different chords, and they had tapped parts and burned bridges as well alongside the guitars. So we didn't just do the fundamentals or the minimum with the bass. We went far beyond that, and I appreciate that excitement for the instrument. Basses can do more than just be low sounds. The drummer really kind of like capable on the kit, full understanding of the main 4 rhythms of music, quarters, eighths, triplets, and sixteenths. Very sort of proficient on the kit. Great sense of kind of like steady pace to it. We had a really great consistency to the measure of things, kept the band together really nicely. Had really cool sort of normal and halftime elements and switch ups between certain parts, knew when to not do the drums in certain elements. And what was really cool as well is that we had some really technically wonderful fills. Like, we were really quick with it, but not in the way where it seemed kind of lackadaisical or like it was a flex. It was done in a way where we just had a moment, a time to shine, a bit of space, and we wanted a bit of zazz in there. And I think that's a good way to describe a lot of these little kind of fun ideas that you have within these tracks. They're discussing some pretty heavy subject matter that's really important to them, but they add zazz, and they don't just limit it to what would be required to make the song sort of sound good. They push the boundaries and try and sort of add more in there to sort of pique your interest, and also to explore what they can get away with, I suppose, without overcomplicating things. So I think instrumentally, in regards to the songwriting and the actual performance, they're incredibly tight, worked well together, supported the vocalist well. And then it's finally the studio production, which I feel is the sort of like other highlight for me. I'm just really thankful that we nailed our vocal takes. So we nailed the guitar, bass, and drum takes, recording them, getting nice, kind of really solid tones, even the little things like the kick and snare parts, the guitars having different sort of like ways of being processed and positioned in different parts there, making it sound huge, coming together when we needed to in the hook section to be kind of like in solidarity with each other and make the track sound huge. It shows that we need to both balance the listener's needs for something to follow along to, whilst also exploring our own musicality. There were no weird resonant frequencies in the speaker, and there were no weird resonant frequencies within the frequency spectrum. When we had those crescendos, a little kind of laser-like sounds with the squigglies, like a different sort of like unexpected thing, it still made sense because of the affectation of it and implementation of it. It had dynamic range to it without being too squeezed, although it was still glued. And it was nice and loud without pumping, so the bus compression limit was handled. So ultimately, I think these 3 tracks I've heard today are really stellar. In terms of how I feel after listening through these tracks as a music reviewer and as just a general listener, I feel like they've got it covered. There's nothing here that I can't say, wow, they should have done this differently or done this differently. Primarily because all the bases are handled and they went beyond those. I think it'll be cool to hear them sort of, I suppose, sing or discuss different subject matters. I wonder how far they go, what the range of themes would be. I feel like, they've got a bright future ahead of them. I look forward to hearing what else they put out next. So thank you for watching my review of this track, or rather these 3 tracks from an act named Color the Void, Burned Bridges, Settling Our Distances, and Mars's Bowling Ball. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show them some love via their various social medias and the YouTube Spotify pages, and stay cool and stay safe. And please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they need the help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next SP Reacts. Spiderhands out.